Also tonight, the Evesham man who's had to live with HIV because of a contaminated blood transfusion.
People had been warned that this was a risky way to do it, but those warnings were ignored. So you can imagine it's made me very angry.
Also tonight, what could be the worst scandal ever to hit the NHS. Thousands of people have died after receiving contaminated blood transfusions over 25 years ago. At the time, the NHS relied on blood products from the USA, but as the AIDS crisis unfolded, people began asking whether they should continue to be used. Jason Evans was just 4 years old when his father Jonathan died after infected with HIV following a contaminated blood transfusion.
And what have you called him?
Jason. JJ for sure.
That got anything to do with Dallas, do you reckon?
No, nothing to do with Dallas. JR.
My mum and dad wanted a child, but obviously my dad didn't want to infect my mum, and my mum didn't want to be infected, so I took a risk, and here I am.
JJ, 3 days old on video. 4 days old.
He's forgotten a day already.
The reason why he and my mum were taking videos was for me to have something when I was older to look back on.
Happy birthday to you.
My first memory of my dad is the last time I ever saw him. It was my birthday, and obviously I was 4 years old. I remember walking into the room and he was on a bed, and I remember just being stood in that room for a period of time and just kind of looking at him but not really understanding what was happening.
And just 6 weeks later, Jason's father died. He was 31 and more than 2,000 other people have died in the last quarter century. Jason now taking legal action against the government for its role in his father's death. He'll be telling his story on the BBC's Panorama later. Andy Evans, no relations from Evesham, contracted hepatitis C and HIV when he was 5 years old. He is the chair of the Tainted Blood campaign group and worked with Panorama on its investigation. Hi, Andy.
Hi, Andrew.
So what was it like finding out that you'd become ill?
Well, I didn't find out until quite a long time after I was infected.
How did you find out?
My parents had to tell me. They knew about 4 years before I did. But even then, there was a delay between my infection and when the doctors knew and the time that they were told. And that seems to be a bit of a pattern that's happened for a lot of people, in that people were tested non-consensually, and then that information has been kept from them for a period of time. So you can imagine what happened for people who were older than I was and who were sexually active. Having that information withheld meant that they had also infected their partners and had the potential to infect any children as well.
So what effect has it had on your life?
I was diagnosed as having full-blown AIDS when I was 16. There was no combination therapy at that point. The combination therapy that now helps us to live almost normal lifespans, albeit under the shadow of side effects and whatnot. But for 4 years, I was struggling to hang on to life. So I was in and out of hospital, and my parents were told on several occasions that I wasn't going to pull through from, the next infection. And then finally, when the medications came online and I started to feel better, there was that sense of social isolation because all my formative years I'd been spending in hospital. Everybody that I knew had moved on. Relationships were a terrible struggle, and there was always that shadow of stigma hanging over me as well. So, it was very difficult to tell anybody or, have people relate to what you were going through.
So how are you now?
So 20 years on, really, from having that all clear from, the status of having full-blown AIDS, I'm not at death's door anymore, but I still struggle daily with my health. With the hepatitis C as well, I just had to go through a year of terrible treatment. It's absolutely awful. I know one guy who had lymphoma and also had hepatitis C, and he went through the chemo for lymphoma, and he went through interferon treatment for hepatitis C, and he said he'd take the chemo any day of the week. It's just awful, awful treatment. But, I'm one of the lucky ones, and those 1,200 that were infected with HIV back in the day, only about 250 are left alive. So, only a fifth of the people that were infected.
So what would you like to see happen now?
I'd like to see this properly investigated. Andy Burnham has stood up in Parliament a couple of weeks ago, and he's now saying that he's had evidence passed to him that this is not only were the warnings ignored and people were non-consensually tested, but also that it has been a criminal cover-up on an industrial scale. And so we feel that the only route, and the government can't really back out of this now, we feel, is some sort of inquiry, and Andy is obviously pushing for a Hillsborough-style inquiry because of the success of that campaign.
OK, well, I guess if that does indeed happen, we'll talk a lot more. But Andy, for now, thank you for telling us your story. Andy Evans from Evesham. You can watch Contaminated Blood, The Search for Truth, BBC One tonight at 9 o'clock, and following that for 30 days on the BBC iPlayer.
Love Herefordshire. Love Worcestershire.
BBC Hereford and Worcester.